Hey folks, Dr. Mike Israetel here for Renaissance Periodization and Juggernaut Training Systems. Moving along our hypertrophy body part guide, we have traps, and it's a trap joke. There, I said it. So now we can move along. Here's the deal with traps. We're going to breeze through this because there's not a ton to say about traps, and we'll get to why that is. Maintenance volume for traps is about 0 sets of direct trap work per week. Why? Because bent rows, upright rows, lateral raises, almost every kind of shoulder work, deadlifts, stiff-legged deadlifts, even squats and good mornings when the bar sits and you're properly braced is a form of trap training. You get so much trap training that your traps can go really big and for sure maintain their size with no direct volume. Didn't I say grow really big? Yep. Minimum effective volume for traps for direct work is 0 sets a week. That means that you can get really big traps without ever training them directly. Now, if you want to be as big as they can, you absolutely have to train them directly on top of their ancillary work. But if you just want your traps to be relatively balanced and you don't care about them a ton, or if the first couple of years of your lifting career you want to focus on the bigger body parts, traps really do take care of themselves. MRV for traps, maximum recovered volume, I would say about 26 sets per week on average. Really big differences here between individuals, so you got to calculate your own numbers, but that's a lot of sets per week. Why? Because trap training really just isn't that hard when it's done properly. And the traps are used to holding your shoulder girdle. They're really quickly recovering muscles, so they can take a lot of damage and a lot of abuse before they start having recovery problems. That means the most productive trap training that you'll have will probably be between 12 and 20 sets of direct trap work per week. Again, huge emphasis here. You don't have to directly train your traps to get them to grow a lot. If you want the best traps that you can have, you definitely have to train them by themselves. You can get a lot of growth. How do we know this? Most powerlifters simply don't train their traps. They just don't. Most powerlifters don't have any kind of shrugs in their program, but most powerlifters have traps that are on par with the best bodybuilders. How the heck is that possible? Heavy pulling, heavy rowing, heavy shoulder press, all the setup for bench, etc., etc., etc. Intensity, 10 to 20 reps per set. Why isn't it any lower? Because, again, deadlifts, stiff-legged deadlifts, rows, hit the traps with very, very high intensities. Oftentimes, what you'll deadlift is a weight that you can't actually shrug even for a single rep. So that's like 1 rep or less, 0 reps. So you get your super heavy work from all the other stuff. When you train your traps, it has to be more of a mind-muscle connection type of training because that's the only kind of training you're not getting, right? So the big stretch under super heavy loads when you're deadlifting, that's totally fine. That takes care of itself. When we train traps, we're going to train them between 10 and 20 reps per set on average. We're going to save the heavy stuff for the assistant stuff, bent rows, upright rows, deadlifts, etc. Exercises. You can do a lot of different kinds. Barbell shrugs. You can do varieties of dumbbell shrugs. You can do bent over versions. We'll talk about in variation a little bit how angles can be important with traps, but here's the deal. With exercises, execution is key. You want to make sure that almost all the time, for every rep, you get a full stretch of your traps, and almost every time, no matter which angle you're pulling, you can pull at this angle, or you can pull at this angle. Whatever angle you're pulling, get all the way to the top of the range of motion and all the way back down. If you're pulling at a bent angle, all the way back as far as it'll go and back down. I personally like to do a top hold for at least a split second at the top and really forming mind-muscle connection with my traps to make sure I'm training my traps, because there's a lot of other muscles that do what the traps do. The levator scapulae, they actually pull your scapula up. It's really easy to train them instead of really feeling your traps. You're still moving almost the same way, but it's not quite going to give you the biggest traps you can get. So I think a mind-muscle connection is important with traps, which is why I keep the weight light. And when we do our exercises, we're going to use really good technique, no swinging around or any of that stuff. If you want extra forces on the traps, if you want to do that by swinging around, you're better off just doing more deadlift, deficit deadlift, bent rows, so on and so forth. As far as variation, it says here range of motion and angles or mean the same thing by this. Yes, you can do shrugs like this, but you can also do shrugs bent over a little bit, or bent over, I'm not going to get off camera, very, very low, because your traps are actually from your neck all the way down to actually about your mid-back. So depending on the angle of pull, whether the angle is here, here, or here, different parts of your traps, by pulling the scapula back and also by pulling it into various positions, are activated. So your traps actually benefit from quite a bit of variation on which angle you pull, and it's just by no means clear that this is the only thing that trains your traps, and anything bent over trains something else. Now, are you going to get other muscles with those pulling variations? Absolutely, but it all makes that area nice and big. And remember, a lot of the way traps work are through shoulder presses and upright rows, and they're going to work in a full range of motion, even with lateral raises, in a way that shrugs really can't do. So, and the good news is that's not even direct trap work, so your traps are benefit by everything you do in your back and shoulder work. It's gonna, at least to some extent, make your traps bigger. Add some isolation moves to that, and you're good to go. When you're training traps by themselves in isolation, how often can you go? What's the best frequency? Well, traps heal relatively fast. You can always get in, and at least with dumbbells or cables, do some light, higher rep work, and it's not super fatiguing, which is why anywhere between 2 and 6 times per week for trap training is totally cool. If you really don't care about your traps, train them 0 days per week. They'll still grow or at least maintain their size. On the other hand, if you really want big traps, work up to 3 or 4 days a week of trap training, maybe even at the beginning of every workout, and you'll get the maximum benefit that you can. Some individuals will even be able to go up to 6 times per week, no problem, and recover just fine. Periodization. Most of the time we have a little bit more complex periodization advice for you, but here's the deal. Traps are super easy. Train them for a couple of months relatively heavy, 10 to 15 sets or reps per set. Then for a month or two, train them with metabolites, drop sets, supersets, maybe 15 to 20 reps per set. And then for a month or so, either go very low volume, just take the month off of trap training altogether. Remember, minimum or a maintenance volume for traps is 0 sets per week. Just because you're doing bent rows and upright rows, lateral raises during that low volume month, your traps are probably staying the same size, getting really unused to the trap movement specifically, so when you come back, they're gonna grow that much more. Special metabolite techniques, we got giant sets on there. What's a giant set? It's when you say barbell shrugs, you put 135 pounds on the bar, you say 60 reps with 30 seconds rest. You do 20 reps until you can't do any more, or 1 or 2 reps shy of failure. You put the barbell down, time yourself 30 seconds, do 10 more, time yourself 30 seconds, 8 more, that's up to 38 reps. However many sets it takes with 30 seconds breaks to get to 60, that's what you did, that's a whole giant set. Next week, maybe you do 65 reps total. Next week, maybe you can do 70 reps total, so on and so forth. We're gonna close this out by saying, look, there's not a lot of secrets and tricks to trap training. If you want traps bigger than the barbell compounds have already given you, start with 2 days a week frequency and just maybe 4 shrugging motions. Maybe one day you can do vertical shrugging motions, another day for 4 sets, another day for 4 sets. You can do something that's a little bit more horizontal to get a different part of the trap. As you get used to that, your recovery adaptation for traps improves and your traps grow, you can add frequency, add volume, add a bunch of variations, and all of a sudden you're on your way to getting the best traps possible. My advice for long-term periodization for folks that want to get as big as they can eventually, maybe get into competitive bodybuilding, is this. Your first at least 3 years of training, don't take your important sort of recovery, total volume, your MRV for your whole body. Don't take that whole recovery ability and piss it away doing shit like traps and forearm training. Get your big legs, big chest, big back, big arms, big shoulders. Compound, heavy basic, normal movements. 3, 4, 5, even later years down the line, when you have a body that's starting to look like a muscular body and you really want to focus on traps, they're easy to bring up, no problem. A couple of months of trap training and they're going to look different. Save them for later in your periodized plan unless you want super big traps right very now. Folks, thanks for tuning in. See you with the next body part.